When Joan of Arc Prime first came out in Rise of Kingdoms, I suggested that this pair right here might be the next city popping or cheeseburgering pair in Rise of Kingdoms. But does it actually work? Well, I've tested it and I've got the results to show you, so stick around. What's up, everybody? Psycho here on the Rise of Kingdoms video. When Joan of Arc Prime first came into Rise of Kingdoms, I suggested that the combination of her fourth skill here, the Blessed, might work really well in combination with Harald's fourth skill here, Stamford Bridge, to create a really nasty cheeseburgering or city popping pair. And if you don't know what that means popping out of your city, hitting a target and popping back in, popping back out of your city, hitting a target and popping back in. And what you want to do is take advantage of anything where you have instant proc skills like Stamford Bridge here. Now, I only have Harald at 3-1-1-1, but it doesn't really matter here because even with one in that fourth skill, you have a 5% chance of casting his active skill over again. Obviously, with that skill maxed, you have a 20% chance, but for the purposes here, this works just fine. So the idea here is that we would pop this skill, and that when this skill pops, that would trigger the Blessed of Joan of Arc. That is, when this skill gets triggered, it should activate Harald's first skill, and given that he is the secondary commander, that should activate the Blessed, causing Joan of Arc to immediately, after one turn of downtime, fire Sacred Banner. But does that combination actually work like it looks like it would in the descriptions? Well, I actually went and tested it. It happens to be that we are in the middle of Karawak ceremony right now. And so I actually just said, okay, let's just test it on one of these Karawak barbarians. And what I want to show you next is the video, and then I'm going to jump into the battle report, which I've saved to show you the results and what we can learn from this testing. All right, here we are with the battle report from this test, and you might have seen, I tried to highlight it in the video, that right away we got a Harald proc. Well, not right away, but it was actually on turn 5. You can see that marked here in the battle report, and you can also see here that on turn 4, Harald Sigurdsson is going to activate the skill Berserker. That is because right here, the attack trigger of Harald Sigurdsson's skill, Stamford Bridge, right? So we've triggered his fourth skill, which activates his primary skill. And that happened on turn 5 in the video. Now, if you're watching the video, you might have thought, it is actually working, because here on turn 6, we get a turn of downtime, which is always the case after you cast the skill. And I've actually done a bunch more testing with XY and Joan, and I'll have to make another video about that. You actually cannot, no matter what, it doesn't seem like no matter what's going on, fire skills 2 turns in a row. You must always have a second of downtime, which actually has some interesting implications. Again, I'll talk about that in another video. But for here, what we should see is a second of downtime, and then what we should see here is Sacred Banner cast. Now, again, if you were watching the recording, you might have said, oh, it worked because it looked like they were cast, but it was actually on turn 8 that Sacred Banner was cast. And as we take a look here, we can see, okay, Berserker was cast, and it did trigger Return of the Saint, which is a skill that activates for 1 second whenever Joan of Arc has, whenever a commander in Joan of Arc's march has used an active skill. So anytime her march uses an active skill, this Return of the Saint, you get an extra 30% normal attack damage for 1 second on the next turn. It does have a cooldown of 5 seconds, but you can see that here when I click on this turn, we get that extra 30% normal attack damage here. So on turn 6, we're getting that normal attack damage, but it doesn't say anything here about Sacred Banner going to fire on this turn. We do see the blessed, but that's the blessed part from the cavalry health. You get that for the entire battle. But there's nothing about the blessed, and that's one of the interesting things here. It doesn't actually show up in the report that the blessed was triggered in these reports. And so what we would expect is it would fire here on turn 7. That is after a turn of downtime from the active skill, right? The active skill on turn 5, turn of downtime, we would expect on turn 7 for Sacred Banner to be cast. We would expect it to tell us here that Joan of Arc is going to cast Sacred Banner, but we don't see that. Instead, what we see is still Stamford Bridge is active and nothing really else happening here, except on this turn, we see that Joan of Arc is going to activate the skill Sacred Banner. Now, why is she activating it on turn 7? Well, a few reasons for that. One is this march actually had a lot of rage. I've got a bunch of talents set up on this march. I also, you can see that we have Rejuvenate on our Joan of Arc, and when Harald activated Berserker, we got an extra 100 rage there. I'm not actually sure if we got any Horn. Yes, we did get a Horn of Fury proc here. So this march was actually gaining, and I can check some of these other turns as well. No Horn of Fury proc there. Turn number 2, no Horn of Fury proc. Turn number 1, and we got a Horn of Fury proc there. So we actually had a ton of rage going on in this march, which is kind of crazy, which is why Joan of Arc actually had enough rage to trigger the skill on turn 7, firing it on turn 8. And so that's where we see Sacred Banner firing off. And again, if this was working the way I had suspected it would work in the initial video, we would have seen this actually cast triggered on turn 6 and cast on turn 7. Instead, it was triggered once the rage bar filled up, just in the usual manner. And Sacred Banner is cast on turn 8. We also got a Ring of Doom effect going, which is kind of cool. And so we cast Sacred Banner, we get Rejuvenate, we have a turn of downtime, which is what we would expect here. And then what we should see is Harald going to cast Berserker. And that's exactly what happens here on turn 10. Harald casts Berserker. And we can see that right here. And what that should do, and notice here, it also triggers Return of the Saint because that was in cooldown. Now it's out of cooldown. So that Return of the Saint, that normal attack damage will be back again here on turn 11. And what we should see is another turn of downtime and Sacred Banner cast again here on turn 12. And as we scroll down here, that's exactly what we see. Now let me go here to turn 11 to see, does it tell us that Joan of Arc is going to, yes, it says Joan of Arc is going to activate Sacred Banner, but she's activating that Sacred Banner because it has been in cooldown the whole time. This is the first sort of true activation of Harald's skill. This was not a Harald's first skill procced by Stamford Bridge. This was a true activation of Harald's first skill on the basis of the rage bar reaching its meter, right? So Joan cast her skill, then Harald cast his, and now Joan cast Sacred Banner in the normal fashion that we would expect. If we continue going down through this report here, we at turn 13, nothing happens. Turn 14, Joan is going to cast Sacred Banner again because this march is gaining just huge amounts of rage because, again, every time Harald uses a skill, every time she uses a skill, she's getting 100 from Rejuvenate. She also has the Horn of Fury. And so we're actually casting it again 2 turns later. We actually have enough rage to cast again. And that's one of the things that's actually interesting about this march, but it's also true for other marches that include Joan of Arc, is just how rapid fire she can fire off skills. So we get a turn of downtime on turn 15. On turn 16, this should be Harald firing his skill. Yes, there it is. Berserker goes again. And now we actually get a little bit of a period where we're not firing a skill for a little while because we don't have Sacred Banner is in cooldown, so we're not getting another activation here. And so then we should see here Joan of Arc casting Sacred Banner again, unless this was so we didn't get any Harald procs again. I only have a 5% chance of proccing Harald on any given turn, so it's not as often as you would see it if you actually had that 4th skill maxed on Harald. So we get a Sacred Banner, and we should get a second of cooldown. We're going to get Harald's skill here. And that should be the Berserker right there. Yes, there it is. And then we get another second of cooldown. And what we should have here is, again, Sacred Banner. And that's exactly what we get. And so, and then I think here, this could be, yeah, again, Sacred Banner, because again, because of what Sacred Banner does, increasing all of that rage plus the rejuvenate rage, we really fire through that cycle much, much faster, right? So that cycle where we get the double Sacred Banner hit, if I can shrink all these down a little bit, we can see this. So there's the first Sacred Banner, right? So turn 21, Sacred Banner, nothing on 22, turn 23, Herald skill, turn 24, nothing, turn 25, Sacred Banner, turn 26, nothing, turn 27, Sacred Banner again. That's just how crazy her skill is, and how one reason why you may want to use Joan of Arc as the primary commander, because she does get 100 rage from that rejuvenate, which can tip over in certain cases. Her firing that skill much more often. So again, and here we actually got another 1 second of downtime and another skill fire. So it's actually really kind of crazy. That's one of the things I learned about looking at this report is, look at this, like every other turn we are firing a skill. Now, sometimes there's longer than every other turn. Sometimes you get little gaps in there, but often it's every other turn we are firing a skill with this march. And it doesn't have to be Herald. It could be a Nevsky. It could be any other secondary commander behind a Joan of Arc, or even Joan of Arc as the secondary with XY. We've seen that in another report as well. But the big takeaway here is that this does not work as I thought. I thought originally that if we paired these two together, that Herald's fourth skill, and I'll pull him up here if I can scroll all the way down to where I could find my Herald, that I originally thought that Herald's fourth skill could proc with a 20% probability, causing this to fire, which would then cause Joan of Arc skill, again, in principle, if you read the text, that's what it looks like it should do, would cause Joan of Arc skill to cast, which would cause this to cast 1 turn later. It actually doesn't work that way. It seems like you actually have to fill up that rage meter to make this all work. So the Joan of Arc, Herald, cheeseburger march, probably not the way to go from a cheeseburger march. Probably going to stick with your Herald Pakal or Pakal Heralds for that march if that's the kind of thing you are looking to do. I hope this helped you get a better understanding of how Joan of Arc Prime works, how she combines, and in this case doesn't combine with Herald, and I would not recommend using that march at all because you lose out on all of the other stats by using all cavalry. But I hope it also helps you understand a little bit of how Joan of Arc Prime can work as a primary commander as well, and firing those skills off in rapid succession. Thanks so much for coming by. If you learned something in this video, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.